Hello, welcome to Connie Martinson Talks Books. I don't know whether you were in the Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, or even today in an organization where when you have, suddenly you're with a group and there's something you've got to accomplish, whether it's getting a play produced or, well, in this case, in this book, a ship had to be refitted. You have a task, and suddenly you look at the people around you and you realize you are the title of this book. You are in a hot group. The authors are Jean Lipman-Blumen and Harold J. Levitt. The book is published by Oxford University Press. Welcome, Jean. Welcome, Hal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's tell our friends that it isn't just hot groups, hot pants, etc. You are the Thornton Bradshaw Professor of Policy,
Public policy.
and
Organizational behavior.
at the Peter Drucker Graduate Institute of Claremont Graduate University. And Hal, you are Professor Emeritus from Stanford, the Kilpatrick
That's right.
Professor of...
Organizational behavior.
Right.
At the Graduate School of Business at Stanford.
Right. So you come to this trailing really great clouds of glory and experience to title a book, Hot Groups, Seeding Them, Feeding Them, and Using Them to Ignite Your Organization. So what is a hot group?
Madame.
A hot group is a state of mind, in a sense. It's an attitude that emerges in a group of people who are faced with a very challenging task. Hot groups are very passionate about the task. They're usually small, they're usually short-lived, they're very insular. They want to go off by themselves and do the task and be left alone. They hate bureaucracy. They don't want to fill out travel forms. And they eat, breathe, sleep, dream the task. They just don't want to, they enjoy spontaneous combustion.
Well, an example you give in the book is that lieutenant in the Navy who is given an impossible task, and he includes both civilians and people from the Navy and other fields. And instead of holding meetings in offices, he makes them come down to the ship.
Which they had never done before. The engineers had offices several miles away from the dock. And the interesting thing is that when the engineers gave them the method for testing some of the engines from their offices, it didn't work. And so Lurchbacker, Lieutenant Lurchbacker, who was leading this operation, called up the engineers and said, "We want you to come over here." When the engineers got there, they discovered they had sent the directions for a different engine. So things began to move a little faster and things began to heat up. When he got all of these people together on the spot, and they had a challenge, which was to complete this, this overhaul in a very short period of time. They were asked to do it in 13 months. This was for the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy had never overhauled a ship in less than...
a cruiser of that size.
Of that size, I'm sorry.
And refitted it from a gun-carrying cruiser to a missile-carrying cruiser.
Hal, Jean used the word challenge.
Yeah.
And in two different ways of using that word. A hot group needs a challenge.
Absolutely.
But they can also be a challenge to the organization they are bred from.
Yeah. Because hot groups tend to go off to work in the direction of the thing they are interested in doing, and they find interference from the organization. They treat anything that comes in from the organization as though it were interference, as though it were blocking their progress on their task, so that organizations face the challenge of coping with hot groups, but they'd better face that challenge because in the world we now live in, they're going to need a lot more of them.
Is this because we're living in a changing world of computers and instant networking?
Sure. That is certainly the major contributor, that technology has so changed the world and is so changing it that the world has become much more volatile and uncertain for most organizations. So organizations are finding it much harder to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. So the traditional organization, which had been built around the notion of stability and essentially doing the same thing tomorrow that they did today, is rapidly becoming a thing of the past. And hot groups are great for doing new things, for facing crises, for doing, for dealing with change and rapid change.
Where does this fit in with the word instant gratification?
Huh.
I mean,
Who's instant gratification?
yeah, well, that's the point. Does the hot group work from an instant gratification on a different level?
In a sense, yes. In a sense, yes. They have something they want to do, and they want to do it. And they want to do it now, and they want the resources to do it now, and they don't want to think about anything else.
And they don't want interference.
Yeah.
But-
Whom should you pick to be in a hot group?
You don't pick them. They have to pick themselves. Hot groups, we use throughout the book, we use an agricultural metaphor rather than an engineering one. You don't manufacture a hot group. A hot group is not a team, for example.
Mm-hmm.
In the last couple of decades, teams have become very important in organizations.
Yeah.
But teams are things typically that have been put together by management. These 5 guys will become a team. This group will become, this set will become another team. Most of those teams never become hot.
Yeah.
Occasionally one will, but they will because somehow there's a chemistry around the task that brings that group together.
Then if you were running an organization and you wanted to get a hot group,
Or
what
a
would
set
you-
of them.
Or a set of them, would you put up a sign-up sheet?
Yes,
There's an interesting
yes and
story.
no. We have a story that's almost, that we learned after the book was put to bed. It was told to us by a dean, a former dean of a business school. And he said during the time that he had been a dean, he found getting faculty to change and getting staff to change was really next to impossible. And after he stepped down from the deanship, he was asked if he would run a faculty retreat. And it had to be about change and innovation. And he began to think of all the people who used to stop him during his ordinary daily rounds at the business school, telling him that they had a thing they were passionately interested in doing. And he had the idea of bringing all of these people, all whom he could remember, to this retreat and giving them each 5 to 10 minutes to talk about their passion, what it was they were dying to do, and to see if there were other people, other faculty members who were
Who would join
similarly
up.
interested. And they developed a whole set of hot groups around several of these passionate individuals. And so you
And they
can
grow.
do it that
They
way.
tend to grow.
That's why I said yes and no.
Yeah.
Because they,
That isn't a manufactured group. You don't decide you and you will be members of
Yeah.
it. But you try to go out and find people who are turned on by the idea that
What
you're
about
involved.
leadership? Because we should also say that you wrote a book called Connective Leadership,
connective
The
edge.
connective edge.
leading in the 20th century, in the next
In
century.
an interdependent world.
All right.
It's
But
coming out in paperback in January 2000.
But some of those ideas that you had there lead into that idea
Yes.
of the group, of it being a circle as a sort of a formula rather than a star, as you put it in one of the diagrams.
Yeah.
That's true, because in hot groups, though there may be an initial person whom we think of as the conductor, who acts as a magnet, who has the passion, the original passion for the idea, leadership is not stable in the hot group. It sort of rolls around to whomever it is who has the expertise for that part of the task. And people are very comfortable with that. Nobody in the group feels he or she has to be the leader. And when I know more about this part of the task, I step forward and I'm the leader. And when he knows the next part, he steps forward. We call those kinds, we call the leader who is the magnet within the group, who around whom people cluster to do the task. We call those people conductors. They're hands-on people. They're part of the group. They're involved in the group. But there are two other kinds of leaders.
Patron, I believe.
Right. A patron is not inside of that group. A patron is slightly outside of that group, but part of the larger organization. And is
Patron
usually
is something like a mentor of an individual.
and an ambassador or a diplomat, because hot groups are not necessarily politically sophisticated. They can make the rest of the organization quite angry at them.
Yeah,
And they
well,
need somebody who mends the
Yeah.
fences, who explains what they're doing,
Who
and who
understands
gets
the
resources.
politics of the organization.
that was something that could have been used in that example you use here of Xerox and their hot group, where there was great antagonism going on and they ended up splitting and not taking advantage.
Yeah, that was really a tragic example, I think, because it happened at the time when Xerox PARC, which was a part of Xerox, but it was physically separate. It was out on the West Coast as opposed to the headquarters on the East Coast. And they had developed essentially a desktop computer with an easy graphical interface, very much like the Macintosh. And they put this together, and they also developed laser printers. But Xerox at that time was a copier company.
Yeah.
And so when people from the larger parent organization came out and visited, they were not terribly interested. And the people within the group didn't know how to communicate or sell what they had done to the rest of the
Nor
organization.
was there a clear patron to bring it
It
back.
works, though, in the example with Macintosh, where the people from Apple even went around as a group to other companies to find out what they were doing that they could incorporate.
Hot groups are very interesting because they don't like to be interfered with, but they don't mind wandering around as long as they're going to people that they think might make a contribution. So they could be pests in an organization in the sense that they are always going after things that are in their own interest, understandably, because they're very focused on what the job they're trying to get done.
In the book, we talk about them as being fickle in the sense that they may come around to your group and appear to be very interested in your group. They probably are interested in the sense that they're interested in your ideas, your key people, anything you have that would help them complete their task. But once they get that, they can go off and they don't need you anymore.
I have hurt feelings. I've
That's
been
right.
used.
And that's exactly what happens.
And that's why you need patrons.
Yeah.
Because the patron can soothe the waters after an event like that.
Yeah, and then there is a third type of leadership.
Yes, and that's what we call the keeper of the flame. And that's somebody who maybe over a period of years has a succession, a whole series of hot groups. And this person starts with one group, and that group may complete its task, and a new task grows out of it. But some of the people in the group may stay on, or they may leave, and new people may join. You see this often in R&D operations. You see it in universities, professors and graduate students who have a group of graduate students around them working on a project. Some graduate, others come in. That keeper of the flame has a series of groups. Not every one of them is necessarily hot, or some are hotter than others. But it's that person who has an enduring commitment to a very large task.
In other words, the head of the organization can't suddenly say, I'm going to form a hot group. But the head can recognize somebody who's got a passion and make the connection. This could be good for the overall of the company.
And the interesting thing
Exactly
is,
right.
if you look around in organizations, hot groups are growing through the cracks everywhere. The issue, as far as we're concerned, is that in the past, traditional organizations would stamp them out. They'd put pesticide on them and kill them off because they didn't fit neatly into the bureaucratic ethos of an organization. And what we're suggesting is look around, recognize the beginnings of a hot group, nurture it, feed it, water it, give it sunshine, give it resources.
Hal, in the book you also mentioned about AT&T with Bell Lab, that they were wise enough with the Bell Lab people to let them go off on their own, so that as a company it was almost a hot group in connection with AT&T.
Yeah, although it was a very large hot group, you might say, because it was 23,000 people at Bell Labs at its peak.
But made up of a whole set of internal hot groups.
Some of which were hot, some of which were not. But essentially, Bell Labs, by isolating itself from the larger company, or being isolated by it, or from it by someone who must have been very wise back in the 20s when it was formed, was able, therefore, to operate in ways that were very different from the rest of AT&T, which was very structured, very formalistic, and so on. And Bell Labs could operate much more in the tradition of the university, in the tradition of science and technology, which meant that you knew that good ideas could come from strange places.
Yeah.
And therefore you encourage these little groups to form.
How long should a hot group live? And what happens when it no longer is serving a purpose?
There's no date, but it should live as long as the task that it's trying to accomplish really intrigues the people who are involved in it. And usually that means it'll last until the job is done. And then it'll dissipate. Hot groups are very interesting because they don't try to live forever.
And that's
And they don't try to
credit.
become departments.
Who takes credit?
That's an interesting issue, because people within the hot group feel the credit is owned jointly. But organizations often make a mistake by singling out one person or two people in the group and recognizing and rewarding those people. That is the kiss of death for a hot group.
It's another point of conflict between hot groups and traditional organizations, because traditional organizations want to reward individuals and punish individuals. And if you do that within a group, if you select members of a group that is really coagulated, really working as a unit, and you decide that you will get the reward, all it does is generate divisiveness within the group.
We have an interesting example in the book from Hill Street Blues. You may recall that was really a groundbreaking TV show some years ago. And we interviewed Barbara Babcock, who was a member of the cast and who had won an Emmy for her performance. Now, the interesting thing that she told us was that the first year of the group, everybody was into everything. Everybody helped everybody. I mean, the writers helped the actors wrote some of the lines. It was a group that was seamless, that people did what needed to be done.
And they were very excited. They felt they were doing something new and unusual and novel.
And there was a tremendous sense of esprit de corps in that group. She said the minute people got Emmys within the cast, that cast a pall on it, because then it broke the spell that other people who didn't get Emmys then would talk to the writers and say, well, do you think you could, fix my part, enlarge it a little bit, because I could certainly act well enough to get an Emmy. And putting the spotlight on one or two people in the group instead of on the group as a group is really quite destructive.
What about performance appraisals?
It's exactly the same problem.
Yeah.
If it's a tradition in organizations, in hierarchies, to do these individual performance appraisals. Now they're doing 360-degree ones, which means that this year's favorite is performance appraisals that are done by people above you in the hierarchy, below you in the hierarchy, and by your peers. But essentially, it's still focused on the individual. And performance appraisals have always caused trouble. There's no organization in the world that I've ever seen that is happy with its performance
Yeah.
appraisal system. And every year they're being changed, and every year they're being modified.
And every year they're causing woe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every year they cause trouble, sure. And when you try to apply them to a group,
Yeah.
then again, what you're doing is generating divisiveness within the group by trying to specify who is the in effect, who is the best person in the group.
Yeah.
When you do that, and you're going to cause trouble.
But what if payment is based on performance appraisal and not everybody is achieving the same monetary reward?
Yep.
Well-
And hot groups are going to cause serious problems for human resources managers, and they should, because human resources managers had better start thinking very differently from the way they've thought in the past. They had better think about ways of rewarding groups and superimposing additional rewards over the differences that individuals get. They're going to have to revise their thinking about how to do these things.
If you give the reward to the whole group,
Yeah.
they will know, the group will know how to distribute the rewards, and that will not interfere with the elan or the spirit of the group.
An interesting leader of hot groups, I mean, one follows him politically, is James Carville, who obviously engenders a hot group wherever he is, whether it was the election in Israel or the election